Hey everyone, welcome. This is the last lecture for History 101. We'll be looking at this idea called absolute enlightenment, kind of mimics what the book talks about. And I'll end it with France. So we're going to look at, like we did for absolutism, we'll look at 3 countries and see how well they implement this idea called absolute enlightenment. And then end it with France because that sets us up for History 102, which will start, or doesn't start, but one of the major events that happens is the French Revolution. So we won't talk about the French Revolution, but we'll end right before it. So first, before we get into these kingdoms, I want to address this concept of Enlightenment absolutism. So Enlightenment absolutism, it's a very problematic term. A lot of historians don't like it because they don't think it's quite useful. However, others feel like it might be, and that's why there's a major debate to use this cohesive term to define this generation. So to kind of sum up some of the major concepts or some of the major definitions associated with this concept is the idea that people are born with natural rights. It goes back to our lesson on absolutism that talked about John Locke, right? That people are just by your very existence have certain rights, and it all depends where you live, what these rights are. However, the difference here is that these rights, these natural rights, quote unquote, are given to you by a king, right? That are influenced by a lot of the Enlightenment era. So Voltaire, Montague, and so forth, right? These kings, many of these kings and queens, were educated by Enlightenment thinkers of this age. So this would shape the way they governed their monarchy. And when it comes to the Enlightenment era, many of them didn't quite believe that every person was born with natural rights. They definitely feared the masses. They feel that the masses are easily corruptible, meaning people like you and me, right? People who do not have land, do not have titles. They didn't believe that these people should be given certain rights. But nevertheless, there's certain rights that just exist in nations that mimic concepts that we have, such as freedom of speech and press, religious tolerance, the expansion of education to different groups of people, and really everybody adhering to the laws, that nobody is above those laws, right? So this kind of summarizes this concept of absolute enlightenment. And again, it's not a perfect definition. It's always been a working definition because, like I said, historians don't really like it. But they find that there's a common enough pattern that different monarchies did, at the very least, attempt to implement ideas of the Enlightenment into their monarchy. And as I stated earlier, many of them are educated by these Enlightenment thinkers. I can't remember if Catherine the Great was educated by Rousseau. I might have to look that up again, but I know she was educated by one of them. And they corresponded once she did become Queen of Russia, or the Empress, sorry. So the first example that we're going to look at is Russia. And Catherine the Great is an interesting story. If you ever get a chance to read a biography, or there's even a show on HBO called Catherine, I think Catherine the Great. And it talks about her life when she was empress. And she begins this life in Prussia, in what is today Germany. And her mother kind of uses her to kind of move up the social ladder. It's a very kind of interesting story. Try to get her married off at a very young age so the mom can actually move up. Eventually she marries into the monarchy, the Russian monarchy, and technically she marries some guy from Sweden who has the right to govern Russia. But nevertheless, Catherine the Great is one of these very curious kids as she kind of grows up. She's very well educated, very inquisitive, and this kind of shapes the way she governs her country. So she writes a book called Instruction which again, for this age, it's quite impressive that a woman is writing something like this. And there she kind of implements a lot of the ideas of the Enlightenment era. And she proposes things like, the ending of serfdom, the ending of torture, and the ending of capital punishment, which again reflect the values of the Enlightenment era, along with other ideas too. What happens in her situation is that the nobility is not happy with her husband, so they set up a coup, and they actually like Catherine the Great. I know she converts to like Russian Orthodox, and people kind of love her because she kind of embodies this idea of Russia, whereas her husband still had these goals of kind of moving back to Europe and rolling some kingdom over there. I think it's Denmark, and he actually wants to go conquer Denmark so he could be king over there. So they actually boot him out and put Catherine in his position. And, she has to kind of return the favor. So she divides Russia into different provinces, letting the nobility control these different territories, which again kind of follow certain ideas of absolute enlightenment, having the support of the nobility. Partly it's just political, but also, it's beneficial to her. And she exempts them from personal taxes and corporal punishment. However, the people that they rule, the local people, are not exempt from these things. So many of these rulers, some of them are okay, but many of them are not. So they come down hard on many of their peasants. And people begin to get tired of that, and they begin to rebel. And one of the best examples in the book talks about this is the revolts by Pugachev, right? Where they're not so much tired of the empress, but they're tired of their local lord, and they begin to revolt, but Catherine needs to come down and support her nobles, and she sends down an army to put down this revolt. And this kind of goes along that, again, argument of the Enlightenment era, that they distrust the masses, that they're not ready to have these rights because they don't know what to do with them. So in Russia, you have the attempt of Enlightenment absolutism, but it just doesn't quite work out, and you actually have serfdom until the 1900s. The next example are the Habsburgs, which is in Austria. Maria Torres, she is the Empress of Austria. And she implements certain ideas that, again, follow this concept of Enlightenment absolutism, such as the clergy having to pay taxes, dividing up Austria into different provinces. But it's really her son, Joseph II, that really transforms this empire. In a very short period of time, he implements certain laws that just revolutionizes Austria almost too quickly, where it begins to alienate the nobility. Here's one of his famous quotes that says, "I have made philosophy the lawmaker of my empire, and her logical application are going to transform Austria." So, like Catherine, they begin to make some changes, such as abolishing serfdom. Part of it's economical too. The economy's just kind of changing, so they need to get rid of it. But nevertheless, he implements laws to eliminate serfdom. This one's very radical, where everybody's equal before the laws. Nobles are not superior to the bourgeois. So everybody must adhere to the law. And for this period, right, when absolutism, kings think they're all powerful, this seems very revolutionary. They begin to allow religious tolerance. The Catholic Church is one of the most powerful religions in Austria. Yet here they follow Voltaire's ideas of religious tolerance. However, it was almost too much too quick, so all these reforms essentially failed, and it just kind of alienated the people, and particularly the nobles, because now everybody's kind of equal. So it didn't quite work out in Austria. But again, the book talks about what happens there more specifically, so feel free to look at the book. But in regards to this concept of Enlightenment absolutism, we do see that both Russia and Austria are good examples of the attempt to implement Enlightenment ideas, but ultimately the failure of it. I guess we can argue the United States will probably be the best examples. I'm going to stop it here. The next example that we're going to talk about is France, and see what happens there.